Preston, I'm General Manager of the Dolores Water Conservancy District, and it's a real pleasure to be able to moderate this panel because the forest health is very important, certainly to us in our area. We manage McPhee Reservoir, the second largest reservoir in the state, and so we've also got our collaborative, the Dwarf Collaborative, working on improving forest health on the watershed into McPhee. And then I'm also have served on the Forest Health Advisory Council, which Mike Lester chairs. And we also have other members of the council here today, J. Paul Brown and Travis Smith. So I've kind of seen this problem from all levels, and the opportunity to have this group of panelists to discuss this, and also the prospect of being able to take this on as a Water Congress issue this is a wonderful opportunity from my perspective, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. We want to devote as much time to our experts as possible, and we're just going to lay out some information for you to begin with, and then we're going to have kind of an interactive discussion to follow. So we'll start with each panelist introducing themselves and maybe saying something about their job on the panel today. So let's start with Steve.
Before we get started, why don't you go around and we'll introduce everybody.
Yeah, that's
We
what
can do that as part of the...
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm Steve Lohr. I'm the Director of Renewable Resources for the Rocky Mountain Region of the Forest Service, here on behalf of our Regional Forester, Brian Farabee.
My name is Mike Lester. I'm State Forester and Director of the Colorado State Forest Service based in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Sean Babington, I just talked about the Farm Bill. I am from DC. I work on the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry in the U.S. Senate.
I'm Ellen Roberts. I'm a lawyer down in Durango. Don't hold that against me. Former state legislator. Don't hold that against me. And I'm currently working under contract with the Colorado State Forest Service and the San Juan National Forest down in the southwest corner.
Okay, with those introductions, let's go ahead and start with Steve Lohr.
So how's everybody doing this morning? All right, I got a few comments there. Good deal. So I'm pleased to be here today and on behalf of the Forest Service, and we sure appreciate the opportunity to talk in front of the Colorado Water Congress today. I'm pinch hitting for the boss, Brian Farabee. He's really sick. He wanted to be here really badly and was unable to make it today. So you're going to have to deal with me here this morning. So are we going to do the slides or no?
Yeah, so the slides
Perfect.
are getting loaded up.
You got it. All right. So I appreciate Mike, coordinating this panel and moderating. I'd like to say that first off, nationwide and particularly in the West, the Forest Service plays a key role in supplying water for the nation. In Colorado, which is a part of our 5-state Rocky Mountain region, we have 7 national forests and 2 grasslands that contribute to over 60% of the state's water supply. So as Governor Hickenlooper pointed out yesterday, these landscapes are iconic and they're central to the prosperity of Colorado. And these forests and landscapes are primary to the sustainability of Colorado's water future. So the topic of forests and water is not new to the Forest Service. Our first chief, Gifford Pinchot, stated that the connection between forest rivers is like that between father and son. No forests, no rivers. So watershed restoration and watershed health and water is at the core of our agency mission. I would say that things have changed over the decades. 100 years ago when the Forest Service was established, most of the lands had either been cut over or burned. So we had a very hands-off approach to the work that we did, which has kind of put us in a different situation now. So as we talked about, as Sean mentioned this morning about fire, the last few decades for the Forest Service has been a little rough on the fire front. The fire seasons have grown longer. The fire frequency, size, and severity has been increasing rapidly. And as Sean pointed out, greater than 50% of Forest Service costs are going towards fighting wildfire. thing won't advance. There we go. So when you're spending greater than 50% of your $5 billion budget on fire suppression, it doesn't leave a whole lot to be proactive about forest management. And so we find ourselves in a predicament now about not being able to keep up with growing demands on the forests and the watersheds. The agency is currently working with Congress, as Sean pointed out, to try to make some corrections to this fire borrowing situation. We recognize the critical importance of our watersheds to downstream water supplies. And so we're really working together both internally and externally to try to rise up and meet some of these landscape challenges. So this slide depicts just a number, a few of the multiple partners that we work with. And I think it was Dr. Adar yesterday that pointed out that water is a catalyst for collaboration. And that's definitely been the case with the Forest Service. We're committed to work with partners to accomplish not just our own objectives, but really look externally to try to meet the objectives of our partners. Over the last decade, the Forest Service has partnered through MOUs and agreements with a number of water utilities, including Colorado Springs Utilities, Denver Water, Aurora Water, and Northern Water, our state forestry partners at the Colorado State Forest Service, and also other federal partners, including the NRCS, the National Park Service, and Bureau of Reclamation. So these agreements that we've worked on to this point have been pretty successful in implementing priorities that focus on watershed restoration and areas of critical need to water utilities. Since 2009, partners have contributed $29 million towards this work, and they plan to invest approximately another $22 million by the year 2021. This is a total investment of $51 million from partners. The Forest Service has already contributed $39 million in matching these efforts, and we are committed to continuing to match these contributions to bring the total effort to over $100 million by the year 2021. So what do we do with that work? So far we've either accomplished or we're underway of doing work on 67,000 acres of treatments, whether it be hazardous fuel removal, prescribed burning, wetland riparian restoration, and and noxious weeds treatments. In addition, we've planted almost 1 million trees and improved 80 miles of trails and roads for our recreationists. So that's great that we've done all that, but we have a lot more to go. We estimate that nationally, just on National Forest System lands, we have an estimated treatment need of between 65 and 82 million acres. The focus is on water today, but these really impact a lot of different sectors of our constituents: livestock producers, recreationists, and the timber industry. So we've got big responsibilities around this. To kind of bring it closer to home in our Rocky Mountain region, 3.5 to 4.5 million acres are in need of treatment. And to put things in perspective, if we were really going to be aggressive about treating these acres, we'd have to treat 700 to 800,000 acres per year. And currently, we're treating only 150,000 acres a year. So one of the key tools that we use is timber harvesting. Working with our industry partners, the Forest Service puts ourselves in a place where we can support local economies, support jobs, and also work towards providing the timber that the growing country needs. One of the things that we think we're really going to have to work with the public on to expand is our use of prescribed fire and our use of natural wildfire ignitions to make differences on the landscape. These are tools that can be used very broadly, and they're much cheaper than some of the mechanical treatments that we've worked on in the past. So we're going to need to increase that. So Sean talked earlier about Farm Bill, and the 2014 Farm Bill, and I really just wanted to bring home some of the work that we're doing. The 2014 Farm Bill has been really successful for us, and one of the things that were really important, or that's been really important to us, is the Good Neighbor Authority aspect of the Farm Bill. We've worked great with the Colorado State Forest Service to implement Good Neighbor Authority projects. And really what it does is it allows us to work across boundaries, work with our state partners, let the state take the lead on some of the things that the Forest Service otherwise would have been the lead on. And to date, the Forest Service has invested $2 million through 8 agreements in Colorado alone. and we've got plans to contribute another $300,000, and that is really that $300,000 is going to be used to research how we can use Good Neighbor Authority even more and leverage things even more. In addition to the Good Neighbor Authority, the Farm Bill also gave us the use of some categorical exclusions in areas where governors have identified insect and disease as a problem. And what this does is it really streamlines our planning efforts. It allows us to get environmental compliance that much faster so we can implement on the landscape. Another thing I'll talk about is the collaborative forest landscape restoration program. In the Forest Service, we have an affinity for acronyms, so we have an acronym for everything, and this is CFLR. There's these projects, basically, we work with local groups, nonprofits, state, and other federal entities to do large landscape scale projects to try to reduce fuels and do watershed restoration. We have 2 of these such projects in Colorado. One is on the Front Range, the Arapahoe, Roosevelt, and Pike San Isabel National Forests, and the other one is on the Western Slope on the Grand Mesa, Uncompahgre, and Gunnison National Forests. These CFLR projects have been really successful for us. We're on track to meet or exceed our targeted goals with those, and to date we've accomplished 80,000 acres of fuels treatments, 8,000 acres of reforestation, and over 16,000 acres of noxious weed treatments. So the Forest Service is continually trying to improve our customer service to the public. We're trying to develop new ways to reach out and connect with communities and be more effective. So in 2018, our Rocky Mountain region hired a joint position with the Nature Conservancy, and the purpose of that position is to really explore and pilot a water fund model for funding restoration efforts. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but funding some of this work is very complicated, very challenging, and it's really expensive work. So we're hoping that this position, using a model similar to what some other states, including New Mexico, have done, will improve our ability to treat landscapes. Another area where we're actively working is to kind of change our own processes around this. Our forest needs have far exceed the capacity of our existing systems to operate in. So the agency is undergoing 2 major modernization efforts, one around environmental planning and another around forest products modernization. If we don't streamline these efforts, it's going to continually take us too long to get these treatments done on the landscape, so we're really working on that. This slide, a few of us got together and tried to identify all the areas where the Forest Service intersects with the water community. And we developed this highly complicated flow chart, bubble chart here. And basically what it identifies is that we have a complex relationship with the water community, but we need to clean that up. So as a result of the complex nature of this work, we in our Rocky Mountain region have developed a regional water board that we're hoping is going to enable us to more strategically and effectively organize around water and address big picture, strategic, forward-thinking topics. The hope here is that the board is going to become more connected to state water issues and really identify potential contributions to state water plans, how the Forest Service can contribute to that. As you can see on this slide, we've got major bug issues in Colorado in particular, and I'm sure Mike will talk a little bit about this, but this is a good shot on the western slope of a spruce beetle epidemic. And the way we've historically done our environmental planning efforts has been single project based, smaller scale. So what we're trying to do is beef up those efforts and do this on a much larger scale. So one example of this is and bear with me on the name of this, but it's the Spruce Beetle Epidemic and Aspen Decline Management Response Project on the Grand Mesa, Uncompahgre, and Gunnison National Forest. And on that project, we have 8 to 12 years worth of work out of that project on over 100,000 acres. So we're really trying to increase those efficiencies. And we do, I'd say, one thing I'll add is that we have a steady increase in our trajectory of treatment acres in Colorado, and we're really hoping that that's going to continue. So I don't know, in conclusion, we recognize that watershed health and forests are keenly connected. And for us to be successful, we're really going to have to make sure that we're, on the Forest Service side, we're doing our due diligence to do everything we can to improve forest health. a significant percent of land-based forested land in Colorado is Forest Service property and in public ownership, that of all the people. And so our goal is to really work with the water community, many of you in this room, to try to figure out how we can streamline these efforts. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk today, and I hope I get a chance to meet some folks, and we'll do more work with you guys in the future. So I will yield my floor here.
Thank you, Steve.
Good morning, everybody. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. As Steve said, and I think you're probably going to hear at least 2 more times, the links between forests and healthy forests in particular and water is one of the most important links we have in the state of Colorado and indeed in the western U.S. I'm going to start out by telling you just a little bit about the State Forest Service. Our mission is really to protect the forest environments for everybody in this room, but not forgetting about your children and your grandchildren, and hopefully your great-grandchildren as well. Our vision are healthy and resilient forests for Colorado. It sounds pretty simple, but I think after listening to Steve, and by the time we're done, you realize it's a lot more complicated than we wish it was. As a state agency, we cover the whole state. Our headquarters in Fort Collins, we're actually part of Colorado State University. There's 5 state forestry agencies in the country report to universities, and we're one of them. We think it's an excellent partnership. But we still have our folks out in the field. And this map shows you our 4 management areas with all the field offices in there. And this next slide, we're going to come back to this, and it's probably going to be a theme before we're all said and done, and that's our budget. And if you look at that budget, the biggest chunk of that is federal grants. So clearly, that federal government piece is incredibly important for us. But I want to point out another piece towards that bottom green slice of the pie. That's our Healthy Forest Vibrant Community Funds. That's where our grant funds come from. And that comes from severance tax. I'm going to get into that a little bit more a little later, if I can keep from crying as I talk about it. Now, you talk about insects and disease, and of course that relationship to forest health, that and fire are our 2 keys, and they're of course related as well. And I got good news for you. Mountain pine beetle, which has eaten up 3.5 million acres of our forest, has got about 900 acres this year. The bad news is it's because they've eaten everything. Spruce bark beetle, though, it continues to cause some pretty serious problems. I think we've got 206,000 acres of infestation right now, and that's 67,000 acres of new infestation. Good news is it's a little down from last year when it was 350,000 acres. Western spruce budworm, about 250,000 acres, and it's up from 226, so that's the downside of it. And then, of course, we wouldn't be foresters if we didn't have some exotic pests to worry about, and for us right now, it's emerald ash borer. Because we don't have any native ash trees, that's going to be contained to our cities, most likely along the Front Range, unless somebody carries firewood over an area that has ash trees. But the bad news is Denver, which is, of course, just south of Boulder, has a lot of ash trees. So we're going to be keeping our eye on that along with the Colorado Department of Agriculture. Now, I think many of you have seen this picture as you go over Wolf Creek Pass. That's what spruce beetle does. We spit those numbers out, but really, this is what people see. And when we have visitors coming to Colorado, we just assume them not have to look at something that looks like this. But the other piece of it is, what does this do to our water? So what does it mean for water? And these are just some top-end talking points, but less live tree cover, that means that our season when we can spread our snowmelt out gets a lot longer. So we lose our snow cover a lot faster. And I think as we all know, that can create problems with snow cover coming down too fast, our infrastructure not being able to handle that, and that's a big one. Dead trees, well, dead trees aren't necessarily more likely to burn, but when they do burn, those fires are much more intense, much harder to manage, and of course that leads to erosion. And of course, as everybody in this room knows, that erosion can really greatly increase the cost of water utilities. I think that's one of the reasons that if you looked at Steve's slides, why the water utilities have been really good partners on forest health efforts, because dredging reservoirs, cleaning out intake valves, it's not easy, and with our granitic soils, it's like trying to scoop up ball bearings, and it's a pretty onerous task. And of course, increased flooding, and that has really negative impacts on infrastructure, including our highways. Give you a little view there of after a fire. And again, if you look at that picture, nice and green right where you're looking, but upstream from that, Well, the road is now the stream, but upstream from that, we had a pretty bad fire, and this is what happens. We refer to ourselves as the nation's water tower. Water from our melting snowpack goes to 19 states. And if you look at that picture there, these are not small states. This is a little over 50% of the land area of the United States. Colorado is a source of a lot of their water. And that's going to be a pretty critical for us moving forward. But it's also pretty critical that the rest of the nation pays attention to this. This isn't just Colorado's problem. This is the nation's problem. And again, I mentioned the utilities earlier, and we don't need to drill on a little more. So the interesting question is, and Steve talked on it about fire barring, which is a real critical issue. But where's the money going to come from? Well, in Colorado, forests are an economic engine. We use about $4 billion worth of wood products each year. That sounds good. That should solve our problem. Except most of that wood doesn't come from Colorado. We've had a massive capacity decline. I'd say this is over the last 30 years of statistic, but we've had an 80% loss in productive capacity in the state of Colorado. That means the part that we paid for it, where people in the wood products industry would come to us and say, hey, we would like to buy your timber so we can go ahead and wood our mills, it's a different dynamic. You'll have people come to you and say, instead of saying, I'll give you money for your trees, they'll say, if you give me money, I'll take your trees off your land and make your forest healthier. Healthier wood products industry, there's not as much of that happening. That's really not that germane. So, how do we get to where we need to get? Well, I'm going to come back to who pays for it. When you saw that thing about severance tax in our budget, which is really closer to 17% of our budget when it's fully funded, severance tax monies usually get 3 payments a year. We got the first payment this year, and that's it. There will be no more payments. There's projected to be no money in the severance fund for next year and the following year as well. So here's a way where we paid for grants for private landowners, and that grant fund was about $1 million. If you figure out about $2,000 an acre, which is some are a little bit more, some are a little bit less, but that's probably a pretty good figure, that $1 million covers about 500 acres. Now, healthier wood products industry, you get that to $1,000, you got 1,000 acres. But we have 24.5 million acres of forest in Colorado. We've got 5 million acres with significant mortality. So even these little things we have to try to nip around the edges, we're losing those as well. The fire barring piece is a major problem. You saw that piece for our budget that has to do with, that comes from the federal government. Forest Service budget is not increasing, and it's more and more of that goes to fire. That's squeezing what Steve can use to manage the national forest, what we can do to manage the rest of your forest, and that's really making it tight. So we can only do this through collaboration. I thought Steve's slide was excellent, showed how many people they're working with. We're working with those folks as well. There's not enough staff in any of our agencies singly to get this done. We can only get this done if we work together. Without it, we've got some real serious problems. Quick example, it's one of the projects we're working on. I saw Heather in here earlier, but the Upper South Platte Partnership. That's a partnership with Denver Water, the U.S. Forest Service, your state Forest Service, TNC is a partner in there, NRCS is a partner in there, Coalition for the Upper South Platte, Jefferson Conservation District. So all these people are pulling together, but what's most important, we use scientific data to try to pick out the areas that were most at risk of fire and had the most erodible soils. So when you don't have enough money and you don't have enough people, you need to make sure you're concentrating in those areas that make the biggest impact. In this case, it's trying to protect the safety of the Strontia Springs Reservoir. Projects that have to look at the way we use our resources has to be, how can we make the biggest impact with what we have? And I think science and data is really going to help us do that. And of course, that's going to continue to develop. Research is critically important. I look at research in forestry and water as kind of like Swiss cheese. Right now, we got more holes than we actually have cheese. But we're going to use what we have to make the best decisions we can. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to our next speaker. Sean?
So I was asked to follow up with these great presentations by talking a little bit about where things are in the federal government and the view from inside the Beltway. And I think that these guys have made it pretty clear, but the linkage here is obvious. We've got about a third of Colorado's landscape in federal ownership, most of that held by the U.S. Forest Service. And I think that I wanted to just give maybe a quick recap of some of the things we heard from Steve and Mike, talk about some concrete examples from Colorado, and then look at what's the lay of the land right now. We've got a pretty good handle on what the problem is and how we've got a big challenge in front of us in restoring and maintaining healthy watersheds that lead to better outcomes for all of you here. How do we get there, and what are the ideas out there? What's the prognosis? So I'll touch on that a little bit, and then hopefully we'll have some discussion about it as well. So the photos in this slide, the one on the far left is the Hermosa Creek watershed, just north of Durango, west of Highway 550 in the southwest part of the state. And it's a good example of the importance of DC and the Beltway, because that 110,000 acre watershed is almost entirely owned by the federal government and the San Juan National Forest. And it's also an interesting case study because a couple years ago, your senior senator, Senator Bennett, and your congressman from the 3rd Congressional District, Congressman Tipton, got together and said, we've got a lot of competing interests here. We've got a lot of concerns about making sure this watershed is healthy going on into the future, and we're going to write a bill along with input from the local community, from Southwestern, from the snowmobile community, from the wilderness community, and they actually wrote a bill that managed this entire watershed. And among the purposes of that bill was to maintain clean water for communities in southwest Colorado. So that's their photo on the left. Your photo on the right, if that's still up there, is the Frying Pan River, of course, adjacent to federal land, hugely important to both the Front Range and western part of the state. So, you know, when we think about federal ownership of forests and how Congress plays and the executive branch plays and the court plays in this stuff, there's just, you gotta pay attention, you gotta participate, and I think that's one of the reasons it's great that the Water Congress is doing this focus here. So, move to the next slide here. And I turn them off. There we go. So, Steve and Mike did a really nice job of this, and this just drives home the point that, you know, the problems here are that we are seeing this poor timing and runoff. We're seeing these really catastrophic wildfires, right? In the literature, you'll hear it referred to as uncharacteristic wildfire. So not just your run-of-the-mill forest fire that takes care of the underbrush and burns low, leaves the big trees, but these things get up into the crown and just incinerate everything and literally melt the soil, right? So you've got sort of a hydrophobic soil when you have a rainstorm. And these guys alluded to it. I'll just mention very quickly that, you know, we've got a couple drivers here, a lot of drivers. Some chief ones are climate change, droughts, you know, shorter winters, less snowpack, and also just a history of suppressing these fires in areas where they're really a natural part of the landscape. So this slide just has a jarring picture, and I took it from actually a Forest Service ecologist's TED Talk. And if you really want to nerd out about forest science, I would actually, as an aside, check out TED Talk, and the scientist's name is Paul Hesburgh, Hessberg. He's out of the Pacific Northwest Research Lab for the Forest Service, and he has this 15 minutes that really do a great job talking about the problem. But you can see from that top picture from the 30s that, you know, we've got a forest that's kind of sparse. You know, sometimes you'll read a study and they say these forests historically were more of a park-like type fashion, not a thick, dense thicket of trees. And then you've got the photo below from a couple years ago, and obviously you see the difference. So for 100 years, the agency, with great intentions but probably poor outcomes, had a policy where they put out every fire they saw first thing in the morning by 10 a.m. Well, that allows all this fuel load to build up, and now we're seeing the fires that we saw in and the High Park fire and the Waldo Canyon fire in Colorado. You saw so much in the Pacific Northwest and California on the news this year. And, we just have really significant issues resulting from the consequences from that inaction. So, let me just go to the next one here. Just a couple quick pictures, and there are so many to choose from. The top one, top right, is the Pine Valley Pipeline outside of Colorado Springs, and you can see that this is following, I think 2013, Andy or Dan, you guys can correct me, but Waldo Canyon fire happened, rainstorm happened, and we had huge erosion problems. So here's an important piece of infrastructure for the city of Colorado Springs that is exposed, broken, and the news story I pulled this from basically said that had the Stanley Canyon pipeline had some sort of an issue, we would have had a significant problem with drinking water for that entire area. So that all is driven by one of those uncharacteristic, really hot wildfires that then was followed by rainstorm, where you have this soil that doesn't hold the water anymore and no trees holding it together, runs right down. The picture below that, this wouldn't be a view from inside the Beltway presentation without a picture from the Senate floor. That's my old boss, Michael Bennett, with a picture of the Poudre River running black after the High Park fire. And I can only imagine how the issues that Northern had to deal with at that point. So, what do the numbers look like? That's the chart to the left, and I don't know if you can see it very well, but basically this comes from a Forest Service report that is called the Burned Area Emergency Response Report they did after the Waldo Canyon fire. And the first column looks at CFS before the fire in these streams and rivers. The second column looks at it after a rain event following the fire. And you're talking about increases of 630% in CFS, 562%. You can only imagine what that does to people living downstream, infrastructure downstream, folks who are planning for water allocations into the future. So just a significant set of issues that we have that all stem from watersheds that are unfortunately unhealthy, and some of the wildfires and other things that result from that. So going to the policy discussion, and sort of, my role in this panel is to talk a little bit about where we've been. I think Steve did a great job talking about the Good Neighbor Authority. That was an idea that Colorado piloted in 2004. A lot of you folks may remember that. It was the 2014 Farm Bill and the work that the committee that I serve on did to expand that program nationwide. So now we've got it available to all 50 states. We've got agreements between the State Forest Service and the Federal Forest Service in several dozen, and folks are just up and running, allowing state forester capacity to help augment what is a really strapped federal budget. And we've heard about that. I'll talk about it a little bit more. Insect and disease program, Steve mentioned that. Congress passed the Farm Bill with this insect and disease program, and then Secretary Vilsack, in a matter of weeks, designated 60 million acres across the country for this expedited treatment. This is less NEPA work, not cutting corners, but looking at areas where there's consensus and collaboration for where we need to do these treatments and moving quickly. So there are hundreds of projects that have either been completed or underway, a lot of great ones in Colorado that are happening, and this is how Congress looked at these things a couple years ago and how we continue to move forward. I won't talk a lot about Stewardship Contracting Authority. A lot of folks know what stewardship contracting is. Moving forward, there is still a lot of work to do. The figure of 65 to 82 million acres still in need of restoration. That's like a third of the entire Forest Service needs some work. And in Congress, I think we're trying to give them the tools and equip them with some of the flexibility to really increase the pace and scale of restoration. So We talked a little bit about prescribed fire, getting fire back on the landscape to mimic some of those historic norms. That's a huge piece. We passed a bill in the latter part of 2016 to help state-federal collaboration to get more prescribed fire back on the landscape. That doesn't work everywhere, right? You need certain conditions, you need low winds, you want some more moisture in the air. So we do have to do some mechanical work. And when we think about whether it's thinning or timber sales or some of these good neighbor agreements that do other restoration tactics, the biggest impediment, and we sound a little bit like broken records, but it's that important, the biggest impediment is the agency's budget right now. The Forest Service has a broken budget regime, and it is because these wildfires have gone so out of control in the last few decades that they were spending, I mentioned this earlier, but they were spending 16% of their budget. It's a $5 billion agency, 16% of that fighting fire in 1995. And this year, they'll probably spend over 60%. That was about the figure for 2017. So that is an incredible shifting of resources from active management of forests, trails maintenance, other restoration, timber sales, you name it, that all of a sudden go to fight fire now, and they get shipped off to folks fighting fire in the backcountry. So the fix for this has been around for a while in Congress. We've got bipartisan bills in both chambers, the House and the Senate, that would treat these really bad wildfires more like a traditional natural disaster, like a hurricane or a tornado, and basically have a separate budget account that would address these really, really bad fires. That frees up the Forest Service to use their regular discretionary budget to get ahead of some of these management challenges and get to those 65 million acres. The problem has been that we've had, unfortunately, like a lot of issues in Congress, we've just had some partisan posturing on both sides. We haven't gotten it done. There's, in response to a question that Chris asked a little earlier, when we're talking about the Farm Bill, I think that there is a unique opportunity here in the next couple months, whether it's a budget agreement that the Congress is working on right now, whether it's the Farm Bill, whether it's something else that comes together. I think that we are seeing a little bit more momentum to try and make this adjustment to how the Forest Service budgets. That is really the number one priority as far as I can tell. And when Secretary Vilsack used to come before our committee, now Secretary Perdue and the chief, this is peppered throughout their testimonies and in the questions that they have with the members of Congress. So fire borrowing, sort of can't overstate it, needs to be a top priority. I'll mention just a couple other quick things that folks are talking about in the context of future legislation and that the administration's working on. You guys mentioned, Steve, the internal NEPA efficiency stuff that you're working on. That's a big deal. The Forest Service does spend a lot of time on NEPA because they have a lot of really divergent interests to balance when they go through these documents. But the Associate Deputy Chief who's in charge of NEPA, who's done an incredible job, a guy named Chris French out in the DC office, is working on some NEPA efficiencies that should cut down on the time and the money that they need to do some of these restoration projects. So that's going on the administrative side. In Congress, we're talking about expanding some existing programs. Good Neighbor was mentioned as a sort of a great outcome of the 2014 Farm Bill, and we are seeing some bipartisan support to expand that program, maybe make it a little bit more flexible so it can get into more acres. We've got folks who are interested in more cross-boundary work, not just using it as a good talking point and saying, oh, fire doesn't respect political boundaries, so we need to work on state, private, and federal. Well, that's true, and that work is happening, but we need to really ramp that up, find out how we get private landowners more and more engaged, and we've got a great bill from Senators Daines from Montana, Republican, Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota, who's a Democrat, and that's one of the things that folks are looking at moving forward. Senators Bennett and Gardner from your home state here have a bill that would help the Forest Service partner with utilities to do more management of utility corridors on National Forest Service land. That's something that's out there. And I'll just finish up by, Mike mentioned, rightfully so, that markets are an important part of this. We can throw money at the problem all day long, but until you've got the sort of, hey, some of this stuff is worth something, whether it's for biomass. There's a lot of interest up on Capitol Hill these days around new engineered wood products. Some of you might be familiar with mass timber or cross-laminated timber, where you take what would traditionally be sort of a low-value tree and engineer it into kind of plywood on steroids, and then use it to build commercial buildings rather than just framing a single-family home. You're talking about commercial buildings, apartment buildings, multifamily, even skyscrapers in some place, and that scares some people, but it's actually a pretty interesting new technology that's come over from Europe, and we're seeing create some new markets, mostly in the Pacific Northwest now, but that's an interesting opportunity that Congress is looking at, and it's an important part of this forest health issue. So I think I'm going to close there, and we'll move on to Ellen and then have a discussion. Thanks.
Well, I am delighted that we're talking about this morning, and just in a little further background, my educational background was in natural resources, including at law school, but before I took that turn, I was a park ranger at a few of our national parks. Yellowstone was the first one, Canyonlands, and then Rocky Mountain National Park. So 99% tree mortality in Rocky Mountain National Park, since I worked there, it was a while ago, is a bit of a jarring experience. And what I'm hoping to do is really give you some ideas. I know this is a very sophisticated audience in terms of the connection between water and forest health. I know you've been paying these costs because I've seen it up there at the Capitol for the 10 years I was at the legislature. But I think why I'm really excited that we're here is you guys are doers. I think with all due respect, it was good to go forth because you got the problem, you know the facts, you know them either from your home turf or what you've heard here, but you also heard from Sean what we've heard for a lot of years. I left the legislature at the end of December 2016. My patience reservoir was running empty, and I can only imagine what it's like to be in Washington, D.C. But for me, the magnitude of the problem we face and the costs that we pay because we haven't moved to a more proactive stance, it's just we can't stand by. We can't wait for other people to fix this. So to me, the challenge was, who are the people who can actually start moving on the ground, not in isolation, not acknowledging the important part of both the National Forest Service, the fire borrowing issue, but I know that at the Capitol, we sent a resolution for several years, every year, to Washington, D.C. as the Colorado State Legislature, saying, please fix fire borrowing. And we're still in the very same place. So the question is, who can make some of these things happen on the ground? I am now working under contract with the Colorado State Forest Service and the San Juan down in southwest Colorado, and Sean just mentioned it. I think the private sector has got to be invited back in. It's critically important that we start moving some of this timber and biomass, and there is value there. Instead of just having it burn up into ash and come down our rivers and sit in the reservoirs, what value can be captured there? And there is value. So what I'm going to try and do is this slide, which is actually a week old, so we had some snow in southwest Colorado last weekend. Of course, it's when I was trying to drive up here. So we've been bumped up by, I think, 3 or 4% down in the southwest corner. But while it's pretty to have all these colors, it's never pretty when it's your corner that's in the red. I know you know this. We all saw what Montana went through last year. We know what California's gone through, It's just a matter of when do we have another one of those summers, or springs or falls, because it is changing. So again, I know you all live by this map, but it is very concerning, and I think what we have to look at, though, is it's not just when our map is red or our particular locale is red. We have to be moving more frequently, more significantly when we're not in the red. So on the next slide. Now, I love Smokey the Bear. I think everybody loves Smokey the Bear. That's why he's still around. But unfortunately, the message that Smokey left in all of our heads, that only you can prevent fires, is no longer true. We have such a fuel load, we have lightning strikes, there are all sorts of ways that we still end up in fires. So I think these guys have done a great job kind of lining it up. But what I really wanted to say was, we in this room need to communicate out to the general public the fact that water and forests are so interconnected. Again, I know you know that, but the general public, when you're trying to talk to people about why do you want to care about healthy forests beside making Smokey happy, besides seeing it green instead of gray or red, it's just critically important that we share that message. So I see the water utilities from the largest urban areas to the rural areas as being a key way to help communicate that out. Severance tax. Okay, so equally frustrating as fire borrowing and not getting that resolved. Again, don't have to tell you where our severance tax is, but this is no way to run a railroad. When we think about if we're going to wait on severance tax to come back and help us at the state level deal with our natural resources issues, whether we're talking about water storage or forest health, we're going to be waiting an awfully long time. We're going to see an awful lot of catastrophic wildfire. So I would just say that severance tax to me is, I'm done waiting for severance tax to be our be-all and end-all. But as we in this room try and figure out how are we going to make the state water plan actually come alive, having forest health be strongly in there, not just as a picture in brochures, but it really has to be figured out, how do we get to what is our natural reservoir? Our statewide natural reservoirs would be healthy forests rather than what we have today. So again, the word that's come up throughout the 3 days here is collaboration, and that's where I'm kind of holding my hand out to you, asking for Water Congress to take this on, but also each and every one of you across the state who are involved in water utilities or water in some way, because we have to start moving forward. We have a number of great resources. We have the U.S. Forest Service, Region 2 in Denver. We've got the State Forest Service statewide as well. We have the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute up on the CSU campus. We have Reagan Wascom's Colorado Water Institute. And there have been some incredible publications. If you need factoids, as you think about this, as you talk to constituents, we have, Mike Lester didn't mention it yet, but he's brought you a whole pile of the forest management to protect Colorado's water resources. This was something the state legislature asked the State Forest Service to work on with CWCB to more fully explain in the water plan the role between the forests and our water supply. So there's a lot of great information in this. Reagan's outfit put out Forestry and Water, and this is last April, an entire issue of Colorado Water that's dedicated to this interconnection. As an alum of University of Colorado, I'd be remiss if I didn't hold up their Winter 2017 Coloradan, which has the dramatic wildfire pictures. But again, I would say if you're waiting to act at the time that we look like this, we're waiting way too long. This is not the time to be dealing with forest health. So the major challenges that are the awareness at all levels of the connection between forest health and water, that the reactive response is not working. We have to get proactive at all levels, hoping that fire borrowing gets fixed soon, hoping that severance tax comes back stronger and is a resource for us, but at the same time, not stopping and just waiting for somebody else to fix this. The wood products industry needs to get revitalized, and there are many ways that I think that we can help develop the markets for them. There's ways that you can use wood products, and I will say as a disclaimer, I'm married to a log home builder, but if you need a log home, let us know. But I'm not really trying to sell log homes, just trying to say that there are many ways we can use wood products in Colorado. Another thing that we're going to have to face is the population increases. We heard from the state demographer, and we're packing more and more people into our wildland-urban interface. And at the state capitol, when bills would come up and counties and cities, municipalities would say, state, stay out of the way, this is a local level issue. Okay, I'm with you on that, as long as the local level's doing something about that. But as we keep packing people into the WUI, what we are doing is putting them at risk, and we're also putting our firefighters at risk. So we need to really be thinking about that at the local level. I wanted to say I had in mind for you certain ways the water utilities could help. If Water Congress takes this on in a strong way, I think that'll be huge. I think anytime you're putting out some sort of insert in your bills or whatever where you can, I've seen some of the very creative Denver water marketing stuff, very impressive, makes me laugh even as a Western Sloper. But use some of that creative juice to get the public making this connection between our forest health and water. Using Colorado wood products and biomass, whether it's electricity generation, whether it's using biochar to restore after a fire. Biochar is a product much like charcoal. If you burn the wood really high, it's very nutrient dense. That might be something that helps with some of the erosion control. I think making sure that people know that severance tax is not a great way to really handle Colorado's natural resources challenges. When there was mention that Water Congress and I think CWCB is going to engage in the 2018 candidate elections at all levels, please include questions about forest health. What are we going to do about it? Again, let's not wait for somebody else to fix it. The water plan and our stream management plan emphasis right now, forest health, what are we going to do about it? What are the mechanisms we can do using collaborations? There is a lot that we can do. There's a lot of mitigation work, but even beyond that, where is there some valuable resource that some might be 1, 2, 3 jobs at a time, but if we can put Coloradans to work to capture the value in that wood, instead of just watching it burn and flow down our waterways, what a better use of that. So the legislature did pass a wildfire income tax deduction that is still applicable in 2018 and 2019. It was incredibly difficult to find it on the State Department of Revenue website. But again, if you send out inserts to your customer base, it's $2,500 per year, 100% tax deduction to the homeowner. Have private landowners be incentivized to get out there and get some of that work done. If you have lobbyists at the Capitol, know that the Legislative Wildfire Matters Committee that we have there is about to expire. Let's keep that Wildfire Matters Committee to the extent that we can keep the state legislators constantly thinking about this. Again, you know that 87 or 89, whatever the number is, percent of Coloradans live 5 miles from the I-25 corridor. They're not out on the western slope. They're probably not really close to some of these forests that are burning. They see it on their TVs, but what we really have to do is we have to have every legislator, urban and rural, seeing this as a key issue. And with that, I think I'll stop, but I did just want to again say that you've got a lot of great minds in this state, from academics to people who are working the jobs for the U.S. Forest Service, the State Forest Service. A lot of people are really trying to crack this nut, but we can't keep waiting. And so it's a matter of really identifying who are the partners who can come to the table. I think Water Congress is huge. I think the Special Districts Association has a key role to play. So many other groups that have a statewide vision really need to get engaged here. So I hope you'll join us in this cracking the nut. Thanks.
All right. Well, from those excellent presentations, I think probably everybody can see that there's really no silver bullet. Lots of challenges and lots of need to collaborate and work together. So what we're going to do now is shift to, I'm going to put some questions to the panel, and it'll pick up on some of the things that you heard about in the presentation, but allow the panelists to do some interaction. And I'd like to direct the first question at Mike Lester, and it has to do with the biomass challenge, but I think it would help everybody to understand the distinction between typical saw timber that has commercial value and then the range of products that fall below and some of the challenges associated with those.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Yeah, if you look at timber, of course, I mean, we've all got, we know the basis of our home are timber. The highest value timber is what you're going to see in furniture and things like that. You got your construction timber, which we actually have a mill in Montrose that does a pretty good job producing that. But a lot of our forest products in Colorado don't have a high economic value. Part of that is because a lot of what gets eaten up in that value is transportation to a mill. And as we have to travel farther to mills, the value of those products continues to drop. Biomass, on the other hand, we have some energy issues in this country. I love solar, love wind, but biomass is a legitimate use of a forest resource, which we have too much of right now, that could be used to generate electricity. In my opinion, I think Ellen probably knows more about this than I do, but as we look at biomass and we look at our utilities, and we look at the price of natural gas, which is really low, if you're a utility, you might say, oh, that's another penny or two per kilowatt hour, we can't afford that. If you look at the state of Colorado, you say, oh my God, if we have a big fire, it's going to cost us $200 million. Somewhere along the lines, we need to help the utilities understand that biomass has a bigger social value than just the lights we turn on. It can also help make our forests healthier and safer. So, I know folks get really kind of squirrely about supports for those types of things. But if you look at the state, we have no free lunch. You're going to pay for it one way or the other. You're going to pay for it through maybe a small subsidy to subsidize something like biomass, or you're going to pay it big time to fight a wildland fire. So I think we can pick our poison, so to speak, but if we're not careful, our poison will pick us.
Steve, would you have anything to add to that?
Yes, so just to put things in perspective, the $100 million figure I threw out there for a lot of the work that we're doing with some of the utilities, that seems like a lot of money. But when you're spending over $2,000 an acre to treat some of these landscapes and watersheds in key areas, it doesn't go real far, to be honest with you. And if we don't develop markets to use some of that small diameter wood, it's going to continually get more and more difficult for us to treat those acres. So there are new technologies. Sean mentioned cross-laminated timbers. There's other uses for small diameter wood like OSB, and those are things that possibly could change the market. Biomass is a tough nut to crack, and if it were easy, we've already done it. And I think it's just going to take a lot of work from the real smart folks in this room and others to figure out how we can increase those markets.
You want to add anything to that, Sean?
I'll just mention one Forest Service program that is really geared towards exactly this question, right? It's called the Wood Innovation Grant Program, maybe something, if you are working on biochar, you are working on mass timber, something along those lines, maybe look into it, right? We can't subsidize these types of things forever, but there's, I think, a very appropriate emphasis on trying to foster those nascent technologies that the federal agency has invested some money in. That's a program we look at in our committee and in the Farm Bill, and it's something that folks should look at when we talk about markets.
Anything, you'd like to add anything else?
Well, and I would again just like those who are water providers to be thinking about what products you might use in your daily work life. Things like Excelsior. Again, the challenge is the biomass. It is that the unmerchantable timber. It's the leftover. It's the scrap wood, whatever you want to call it. It's trying to figure out how do you make a product out of that somebody can sell. Government grants will be needed to some degree, but I hope we're all looking for the day when what we really have are self-sustaining private sector jobs. I think that is our long-term success, is when we have people in there, and we have learned so much. We're not talking about logging practices from the 1800s. We're talking about NEPA applying. We're talking about doing this in an environmentally sensitive way, but using common sense at the same time to move this product out. So I think there are ways, if people in construction, it might be CDOT, but again, water utilities, if you're dealing with erosion issues, there are Colorado, and that's the part that I want to underscore, is Colorado wood products, because we do import so much into the state, and it's crazy. My husband has, for years, traveled, and we're in southwest Colorado, but he's traveled to Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah to get his logs, to build log homes, custom log homes in southwest Colorado. If you would think that's a little odd that you have to drive 6, 8, 10 hours to go get the logs. And so there are some issues that we have about having people in the forest being able to get their contracts, and we need to support the U.S. Forest Service in doing their job, because they'll do it very professionally. I also wanted to plug the Nature Conservancy has done an excellent job across the state of Colorado, and I know a lot of you have worked with them. But again, we have strong environmental partners, and we're talking about doing this in a responsible way, but we got to get it done.
Thank you, Ellen. So I guess for the next question, and let's see if we have anything to add or discuss as a panel about, and it's been touched on fairly well, but about financing forest health. Is there anything else that we should throw into that discussion at this point?
Well, I just want to say, I know we sound a little bit gloom and doom here, but I think if you look at what our forest brings us in Colorado, clearly the waters, that's why we're here today, and that's an obvious one. But our biggest industry is recreation. You know, people who recreate, I got a feeling that they're really more looking for green rather than gray. So that's just me, but I think we can probably assume that this is not helping our recreation situation either. So I think there are some options of putting the proper value on what our forests bring to us. Folks dealing with water, you deal with this all the time. People don't value the product you bring. Every time you try to have an increase to deal with a very real problem that needs to be solved, people squawk like there's no tomorrow. But the fact of the matter is, our forests, our waters bring tremendous value to the state, and without them, we don't have a state. So I think part of it is making sure that people value the forest and what it brings. Because until they do, they're going to think about it as something they don't have to spend any money on, they don't have to invest in, and we do have to invest in it, because the downside is, as I said earlier, there is no free lunch. If we don't make this investment, we're going to be paying out a much larger price from fighting wildfires, from fighting water quality. These are things that can really, really damage the state of Colorado. So that investment has got to happen. It has got to come from somewhere. You've heard some examples here. I do believe that markets ultimately are going to be where we're going to have to drive these costs down. But people have to understand how important our forests are and how important healthy forests are.
Would anybody else like to add? Ellen?
There are two mechanisms in the state of Colorado that I'm not sure either one has been used, but one that you all are familiar with, the Colorado Water and Power Authority, actually has authority in statute to loan money to healthier forest projects. So I'm not sure that, and I was hoping to catch Mike Broad to ask him, but Not sure that there's been any of those, but if you're involved in the authority or you have any thoughts, that would be a great way, and it includes loans even to private entities, private individuals. So that's again underscoring the acknowledgement of the connection of water and healthy forests. The other is there was a statute passed that allowed for forest health districts, which is a type of special district. It hasn't been utilized. I checked with Ann Terry at Special Districts Association, probably because of the expense of actually setting it up. But again, maybe there's some collaborative arrangements with existing special districts where you might pull together and figure out, does it make sense to look at a forest health district? I don't know. I know the legislature has tried to put some options out there. Not all of them have been utilized.
Just one more quick thing. Ellen mentioned about buying Colorado wood products, which is important to support the industry we do have. And there's an association with the State Forest Service called CoWood, and it's a label you can find on products that have been made in Colorado. So when you're making purchases, if you have the option to go with the CoWood, that's something that you really should look for. The other thing is we have, financed through severance taxes, a revolving loan fund, and it's pretty self-sustaining because the folks that get the loans are really, really good about paying them back. And it's a small amount of money, but it can certainly help some industries get off the ground with that revolving loan fund. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that it's a tool we have out there.
One thing that I'll say on the financing of forest health, we've obviously talked about federal and state investments just with taxpayer dollars going to finance the restoration work. And we've talked about the private sector in the markets sort of sense, but we haven't talked about the investment kind of sense. There's about a $3 billion market out there of investors who are interested in natural resource restoration type investments, and that includes forest health. And the Forest Service has pretty recently signed MOU with an outfit called Blue Forest Conservation that really puts together an investment vehicle for folks who are looking to invest money and do these projects, and then through the natural resource benefits that the restoration provides, get a return a few years down the road. So when we talk about those benefits, it's avoided wildfire, it's better flows, it's less infrastructure damage, and those are things that a lot of folks in this room, I believe, would be interested in. So it's a newer thing, but conservation finance is kind of the umbrella term. Sometimes people also hear it termed pay for performance. And this is a new thing that's just kind of coming out of the gate here when it comes to forest restoration, but as we move forward, might be an important piece of the puzzle when we think about how many acres we actually need to do and how quickly it needs to happen.
You stole my thunder on that, Sean, but that's good. I'll mention actually another thing that I've had experience with over the years, and that's, you saw on the slide we had a few corporate partners on there, and there is really a growing momentum in the corporate world about sustainability. There's a lot of these corporations that use a lot of water that are becoming very interested in doing philanthropic work. Most of them have foundations associated with them, and Forest Service has got a couple of really big partners in that arena, and Coca-Cola has kind of led the way with that, and they're doing a lot of watershed restoration type work around the country. And again, there's a momentum shift along that, and those folks are, those corporations are realizing that they need to give back, and some of them have goals to become water neutral. And so that's another way that I think that we can really engage folks to try to do more around financing this work.
Thank you, Steve. So next question really has to do with leadership, and then how to integrate the public and private entities that can be helpful in this. So I guess broadly asking the question, where does the leadership come from to bring all of this together? And then what role do various entities need to play in improving forest health? So it's really there's a lot, you can see that there's a lot of activity out there, but it's really trying to bring this together into some sort of leadership structure and into some sort of collaborative structure. So who'd like to tackle that one? Thank you, Mike.
You can tell I'm shy about picking up this microphone. Leadership, this is where I'd like to look around the room here. This is leadership. This room is full of leaders. I mean, we got some folks up here who have some leadership experience, but this room is full of leaders. We see a problem. I mean, I look at folks in here like Travis and Jay Paul, folks who are on our Forest Health Advisory Council. I mean, there's real leadership in this room. So I would say that leadership is here, and you're seeing people picking up projects, trying to talk to the General Assembly about issues. We certainly have leadership in our U.S. Forest Service. I'd like to think we have it in our state agencies as well. So the leadership is here, but the leadership has to take action. We have to work together. We have to talk. I used an example earlier about the Upper South Platte project. We got the 232, and if I have to name all the twos other than the two states, I'm probably going to miss it. But that's another example in the Southwest where leaders got together and said, we have a problem we have to solve. I know there's some level of paralysis in Washington, and I think we understand why some of those reasons are, but we can't afford to be paralyzed. We have to talk to each other, grab the relative entities, and put these things together. Again, I mentioned the Upper South Platte just because you had federal agencies, you had state agencies, you had county conservation districts, you had environmental groups all coming together to solve a problem. They identified the problem, they brought those resources to bear to solve that problem. That has to happen. And again, as I look around this room, I see the components for leadership to make that happen. They're here.
I think Mike's just made the case for why we're trying to bring this and get this mainstream in the Colorado Water Congress. I think that's well put, Mike. Anybody else would like to add anything on leadership? Okay, so well done, Mike. I think the panel's satisfied with your response. Sean's we've had a pretty good discussion of legislative priorities. Do you have anything that you would like to add or highlight, Sean, legislative? Certainly, fire borrowing is top of the list.
Yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job of covering that. I think less specific programs and maybe just kind of principles that we ought to think about, and this is taking off my staffer hat and just saying as an advocate who wants to see healthier forests, the best way to get some of these policies enacted is to try and sit around the table and let's not back into our left-right DR corners, but as your advocates for this, say, where do we have bipartisan support? Where can we get the Wilderness Society staffer and the Snowmobile Club member together around a table and say, this is what makes sense for this parcel, this watershed. That is how we're going to cut through some of that paralysis in Washington, and those are those unique coalitions that when a coalition like that comes in to meet with me or my colleagues, alarm bells go off to say, okay, we got something here. This is something that might actually see its way into law and not just the same old tired problems, that some of the policies, in the past have run into, which is that partisan paralysis. So collaboration, work with folks you don't normally work with, be clear about these asks with your legislators. Those principles are going to get us a lot farther than the tried and true partisan handbook.
Thank you, Sean. Anybody else want to add anything about legislative priorities? Okay, and let's move then to kind of a good segue to the role of forest health collaboratives in advancing forest health.
I'll jump in. In Southwest Colorado, we're used to having to work hard together because we're so far away from a lot of the front range resources, and we're pretty resourceful. And Mike is very involved in one in the Dolores River area. We have another one in Pagosa. We've got the REACT group in the San Luis Valley. We have, it was mentioned, the 232, which is a collaborative where we're trying to work on a watershed landscape scale, again, to the point that fire and water do not respect geopolitical boundaries, but how do we work in a way that makes sense with Mother Nature? And so 232 is with northern New Mexico and southwest Colorado. And we're really talking about some things that we can do together, but it is, to Sean's point about you got to sit at the table, and sometimes there are those uncomfortable moments where people who aren't always aligned with each other are trying to work through the problem. But I would say that having those locally based relationships and solutions make the policy making at the state and federal level so much stronger and more possible if you've really done that hard work at the local level. So I know many of the water utilities are involved in the collaboratives, but I really think that's time very well spent to have you at the table, whoever's showing up to those meetings. I think that's critically important.
Go ahead. Jim?
Yeah, I would say that, I think at one time the Forest Service was more of a, hey, this is what we're going to do, what do y'all think? And we've kind of shifted away from that to, hey, what would y'all like to see us do? And that's really the spirit of collaboration. That's how a lot of our legislation is set up now, is that we recognize that without these high levels of collaboration, we're just not going to get work done. So I think that as we move forward, we're really relying on the public and our key constituencies to advance the work that we're trying to do. And without it, as Ellen pointed out, I mean, without these collaboratives, it's just not going to work. We can't do things in a vacuum. So it's key.
I think we need to look at ourselves as problem solvers. Somebody said this long ago as a congressman from North Carolina. He said, these are not Democratic forests in our country. They're not Republican forests in our country. They're American forests. And here they're Colorado's forests. And each and every one of us has to look at ourselves as a problem solver. We just can't afford to throw bricks at each other. We have to say, let's sit down and figure out let's identify the problem and figure out how we solve the problem. And that initiative starts with all of us. As long as people are throwing bricks and we participate, nothing's going to get done except a lot of bricks will get thrown. But I think we're problem solvers. This group in this room are problem solvers, so we have to look at that as our key role, solving those problems. And I think if we take that attitude, I think we're going to make progress.
Let me just give one kind of case study example of why collaboratives are so important. We talked, I spoke briefly, Steve spoke about the insect and disease program that we put in place for the Forest Service in the 2014 Farm Bill. And that has been very successful, very popular, hundreds of projects across the country, and including many in Colorado. One of the really great success stories is that there has been almost zero litigation from outside groups surrounding that new authority, which is not the case for a lot of stuff that the Forest Service does. Unfortunately, the one place where there was litigation was on the Tahoe National Forest in California, and the judge sided with the group that brought it, and the ruling was because it was not a collaborative group that proposed the project. And it's just, we wrote collaborative into that bill, and the judge saw that they didn't follow that prescription, and it just, I think, kind of speaks volumes about how much work we can get done, these hundreds and hundreds of projects, if we do use good collaboration, and if we take some shortcuts, we're going to get stopped.
All right, I think we're coming to the close of our time. Does anybody have any kind of burning things that you'd like to add to the discussion? Mike?
Not burning, but I did want to point out that these amendments to the water plan are in the corner of the stage over here. I've got about 50 of them.
All right. Well, let's thank the panelists for their work and for the information they provided.